Welcome everybody to this edition of Incubate Vegas. I'm really pleased to introduce Jose Padilla. Jose is a longtime mentor for Startup ND in the legal aspects. He used to be located here in Las Vegas, but then he flew the coop and went to Austin. But he's still licensed in both states. And so he is an expert on startup law, and he even has startup himself. So he knows exactly what you're going through. So everybody, Jose Padilla. Thank you.
Welcome over. Hello, everyone. And I guess for the slides, does this work?
Just click over here. This should work.
Okay.
Is it not?
No.
All right. Now, there we go.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Could you go back, please?
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Hi, guys. How you doing? It's Andrew. Jose, could you go back one more, please? Thank you. So just the schedule, so you guys all know, we're doing legal strategy tonight with Jose. We'll then be doing sales and financials, mentor session on this Thursday. Next Tuesday, we're doing supply chain. Next Thursday, we're going to do pitch practice. That's a really good one. Get those nerves off. And then our demo days are going to be on June 13th and 14th, which is going to be, I believe, next Friday and Saturday. Very excited for that. Could you go to the next one, please? Thank you. So what is the point of demo day? The point of demo day is Seed Vegas. When you complete Incubate Vegas, if you have graduated, which we define as attending at least 6 classes and pitching at one of the demo days, you'll be eligible for Seed Vegas, which is a virtual mentorship program. One of our mentors is Jose, and you are eligible for up to $25,000 in non-diluted funding. This is an invite-only program that is based on you graduating, and the deadline to apply, and if you are invited to, is July 4th, and you'll be selected and notified by mid-July. If you have any other questions about this program, feel free to ask me, Maggie, anyone. It's a great opportunity, and looking forward hopefully to see you guys there. And now it should be your turn, Jose. Next slide. All right, I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody online, everyone here in person, especially the brave ones in person, since we went through one of the Las Vegas monsoons and whatnot. So we're going to be covering legal strategy and entity formation. It's a topic that I guess I'm happy to have people come, because legal topics are not always the most exciting ones, but they are also the most necessary ones. And about me, just wanted a quick introduction. I have my own law firm. I live in Texas now. I used to live here in Vegas. I've been a corporate attorney for about 25 years now. Started my practice, I went to Harvard undergrad, Penn for law school, began my career working for a San Francisco-based firm, and then was at big law firms, then went in-house. I worked at Aristocrat for a few years, and then started my own law firm. And that's what I'm doing now, where I work with pretty much just startups and investors, and just always just in doing a lot of corporate formations and contracts and everything in that area. And so, we're going to start off with, why do you need to form an entity? Because it is possible to do a business as on your own, and that would be called a sole proprietorship. But the reason you would need to is really 2 reasons. The main one is liability protection, which basically means that if you have a legal entity, it can protect you from lawsuits, in that if someone would sue the business, they only can get at the assets of the business and not your personal assets. So one is, you need to separate those things. And then when you have them separated, only the business assets are available to someone that wants to sue. Otherwise, if you're a sole proprietorship and you do something with your business, and it could be just something simple as having debt. You get a loan for your business, you can't pay it back. They'll have the ability to go at your house, your car, everything that you own personally. So that's why you would want to form an entity, the liability protection. And the second reason is taxation, in that there are things you can do tax-wise to help minimize the taxes that you have to pay. So there's 2 main reasons that you need to form an entity. And what kind of entity that you need to form? There are 2 main types. They vary actually by state, and they also vary, and there's a lot more than just these 2, but for basically 99.9% of small businesses, you just really need to consider these 2. And it's an LLC, which stands for a limited liability company, and then a corporation. Now, you might have heard the term C Corp and S Corp. What I want to make clear to people is that legally, it's just a corporation. S Corp, C Corp refer to IRS tax designations. It's really for a short for taxed under subsection C of the IRS tax code, which is the C Corp, and taxed under subsection S of the IRS tax code, which is S Corp. Yeah, I have a question here.
Hold up.
I literally just did this week. I just submitted it yesterday, so this is very good for me. But there was something like a professional LLC.
Yeah,
What's
that's
that?
when you're like a lawyer like me.
Okay, so I don't wonder about that.
So, right, you don't have to
Gotcha.
worry about those.
No worry about that. That's it.
So that's one thing to worry about. Like there are a lot of different other entities. Only worry about these. Everything else, not for you. Because there's LPs, LLPs, there's a whole bunch of others. Professional associations, none of those really have to apply. So the thing with C Corp, S Corp, we're going to be talking more about those, but those are tax designations. Those are not legal ones. Legally, you're either an LLC or you're a corporation. So LLC, limited liability company, the owners are called members. So the members of an LLC, that's what you call an owner. It's managed either by the members or you can have it managed like by a board of managers, which would be similar to board of directors. Then the governing documents, basically the documents that govern it are going to be the certificate of formation, and then also its operating agreement, which can also be called an LLC agreement, which can also be called a company agreement. One thing about corporate law is that we give, I don't know, 5 different names for everything. Every one thing there is, we have a whole bunch of different names for it. Like certificate of formation, in some states, they're called certificate of incorporation, or it's called articles of formation or articles of incorporation. There's a whole bunch of different names. They're also called a charter. It's all the same thing, certificate of formation. And then taxation with an LLC, the default is that it's a pass-through. In other words, it's ignored for tax purposes. You actually have to fill out a form for it, but the tax goes to your personal income tax. So even though the liability is protected, the income or losses are on your personal tax return or on the tax return of all the members of the owners. So if you have more than one, it'll be a partnership tax return. So that's the default rule. But if you want to, you can choose to be taxed as a corporation. And there are some reasons you may want to. For most of you, you will not want to, but you have the choice. So the LLC kind of it's very flexible. You can choose how you want to be governed, either by the board of managers or by members directly. If you want to make it really simple, like a partnership in a way where it's the members make all the decision, or you can have the members elect the board of managers and the board of managers make the decisions. So you have that choice whether you want to or not. And all these and how that happens, who's governing it, who's running it, is all spelled out in the operating agreement. So just know that's how it works. Then
Operating agreement. So on that paper, it actually asks you like president or equivalent, treasurer or equivalent, secretary or equivalent, maybe director, something like that. Can it just be you? And if it's just you, do you need to put yourself in for all those slots?
yeah, so the question for those that didn't hear was whether there's officer positions that you need to fill in when you're doing a certificate of formation, and everything can be one person.
So, but what if, do you have to fill them all out or
You have to have those officers.
you do? So you need to put, if it's just one person, put them all in.
You can have one person be
Gotcha.
everything. You have to have officers.
But you have to have officers. That was my question. Thank you very much.
So that's one thing for everything is one
Okay.
person can be everything. You can all as you want, really
Yeah.
flexible, but you have to have officers, and whoever's the officer can be one person, be everything. With a corporation, the owners are called shareholders or stockholders. So if you hear those terms interchangeable, they both mean the same thing, totally interchangeable. Those are the owners. And the owners elect the board of directors. So those are chosen by the board of directors. And with a corporation, there is no choice. This is how it always has to be. You always have to have a board of directors. Because I've had some clients will say, I have a corporation, but I don't have directors. No, you do. You just didn't appoint it. You just don't know who it is, but you have to have one. So that's the thing with the corporation. You have to have board directors. The governing documents are going to be the certificate of incorporation and the bylaws. Now, the difference is with the LLC is that in the corporation, the certificate of incorporation can often have more information other than the certificate of formation of the LLC usually just says the name and maybe the officers. The corporation certificate of incorporation will often also have what are the rights that each shareholders may have. it'll have more information as to that. The bylaws is mostly about how the voting works, how the decisions are being made in the corporation. So that's the governing documents. That's why they're important because, for example, you can have bylaws that say that if you want to sell the company, you have to have a unanimous decision of all the shareholders. Or you could have it that it says only a majority of the shareholders need to decide whether to sell the company or dissolve the company. So those where it becomes important when decisions need to be made. If there's more than one shareholder, then, how many people need to vote? If it's just one person by yourself, you can be the sole shareholder and you elect yourself as the sole board director and you appoint yourself as the CEO, COO, president, secretary, treasurer, you can be everything. And it's just one person doing all these things. Regardless, the important thing with the corporation, as opposed to the LLC, is that you have to have an annual meeting with the corporation. Even if it's all by yourself, you need to have a meeting by yourself every year. And if not, you threaten the liability protection that the corporation has. Basically, what will happen is that if somebody wants to sue you, they'll say, this wasn't really a corporation. This was a sham that you made in order to scam me and take my money. So in reality, I should have access to your personal money because you just use this to keep me from suing and getting your personal money. So that's why you need to follow kind of these rules and you need to do all the things that you need to do and appoint who you need to appoint, even if it's just all yourself. Because taking all these steps, you're showing that you took it seriously and you're treating this as a separate person. Because under the law, we have a natural person, which is human beings, and a legal person, which would be these entities. And all are considered persons and they're separate personalities. And so that's why they have the liability protection.
Sorry, I just did this yesterday, so this is very fresh. Can you appoint your spouse or does that kind of count as you? Like
Humans are separate.
Okay.
Spouse is a person, is a human being.
Okay.
It's a separate human being.
So you and your spouse can do all the spots, okay?
Yeah.
Two questions. The first is about the stockholders, directors, and officers. If you form a company with others and they leave the company and you're then alone, how do you then take their officer positions back and place them onto yourself? Is there a formal way that you do that?
That is all in your bylaws. So you make sure that when you make your bylaws, that most bylaws, if you take anything that's off the internet or if your attorney gives you one, it'll tell you how all that is done.
Okay. And then the other is regarding the annual meeting thing. If you have, let's say, an S Corp that you have been using as a loan out company for your work as a professional in an industry, but you haven't been doing those annual meetings regularly throughout the life of that company, can you start doing it and then suddenly it becomes valid? Or is it like your company's dirty now, you should probably just
No, you
flip it
can
up?
start doing it. You can
No.
always fix things.
Got it.
That's the one point I tell everyone as a lawyer. In corporate law, any mistake can be fixed. The only question is how much does it cost to fix it? That's it. Money can solve all problems in corporate law. So the thing is, yes, you can fix it. It's just now you have to do all these meetings, you have to do what they call ratifications, which you're going to say every past action, you're going to ratify those. There's just additional work that you need to do that you didn't do before. You're going to start having to do it now.
Great. Thank you.
I'd say there's a question online from Renee. She's saying that it's been suggested that she create a Delaware S Corp, which I suspect is probably a Delaware C Corp instead of an LLC. And how do you make the decision? Do you know what the difference is in the costs?
Yes, and that's going to be on the next couple slides. So if we can hold off,
Okay.
I'm going to be getting in depth into that question.
Okay, Renee, so feel free to modify your question. Go ahead, Jose, sorry.
Yeah, we have another question here.
Yes, why investors always prefer incorporation to LLC?
That's on the next couple slides as well. So now that we've gotten this, we'll get to, I think everyone's ready for the next slide then. So the last point on here was the taxation. Again, I mentioned it's C Corp or S Corp. Now the default for every corporation is a C Corp, which is that it means that it's taxed as a separate person. So a corporation has to file its tax returns and they say it's double taxed because the corporation pays taxes on all profits And then if the corporation pays dividends to the shareholders, to its owners, that dividend income is separate income to the stockholders, and the stockholders have to pay tax on that income. So basically, that same dollar of profit gets taxed in the corporate level, gets taxed again in the shareholder level. And so because of that, it's every dollar of profit is taxed 2 times with the corporation. And that's the C Corp. S Corp is basically you make the corporation a pass-through. And I'm going to get into really the difference between those on this one. So the S Corp is essentially you treat it like the pass-through LLC, where all the profit is paid by the owners. The corporation doesn't pay tax itself separately. Now, the one thing with S Corps is that the S Corp, just the quick little history, the LLC wasn't invented until the 90s. And I'm old enough to remember when it was invented. I was in law school at the time it was invented in the US. Before then, the only way to have a pass-through, the main way was you'd have a sole proprietorship, you had a partnership, and you had a corporation. But you had the S Corp option. The S Corp was invented in the late 70s. And so that was kind of the only option. And the S Corp was to do an S Corp, and it's the same today. You can't just become an S Corp. You actually have to apply to the IRS, and you have to follow certain rules. Those rules include that you can't have more than 100 shareholders. You can't have separate classes of stock. They all have to be the same class of stock. And all of the shareholders have to be US citizens or permanent residents. So you can't have foreigners own an S Corp. And the reason why, because what they're trying to do is to make sure everything's going to be taxed anyways. Only US persons can be involved with an S Corp. And those rules continue to this day. They do not apply to LLCs. LLCs can have owners from anyone in the world. But an S Corp, that is the rule with them. Now, there's reasons why S Corps are still useful, which I'll get into. So that's why a lot of people do a pass-through. So you'll want that, say the owner pays less tax. You don't have to pay the double taxation. So then be like, well, why would you ever want to be taxed as a corporate level? Well, one of the reasons I'll skip is the QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. That's a tax incentive that says that if I buy shares in a stock, I hold the stock for more than 5 years. And after 5 years, when I sell it, the company has assets of less than $50 million. Then when I sell those shares, I pay 0% tax. So that's a huge tax incentive. There's a whole bunch of other rules, by the way. There's like 20 other rules, but those are the main ones. Those are the main biggest ones. Only applies to C Corps. Does not apply to an S Corp, does not apply to an LLC. You have to be a corporation that's being taxed as a C Corp in order to obtain the QSBS status. That is why every investor is going to say, I only am going to invest in the QSBS because I'm going to get 0% tax. It's a huge tax incentive. Basically, it's the IRS's way of saying, hey, stop not paying separate tax with the LLC, get into a C Corp so you can pay more taxes to us. Because the investor is going to be like, I want that. But I think we have a...
Yes. Question online. Jojo wants to know, I'm a British national and hold a British passport with an E2 visa linked to my British husband. Can I still start an S Corp?
No. Unless they have US citizenship or US permanent residency, a green card.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're saying that for those who invest in that C Corp, that's what they benefit, or the owners of the C Corp purchasing
Anyone
stock?
that has purchased shares, so that would include the owners.
Anyone purchasing shares of that corporation?
Correct. And owners purchase shares.
And
All
owners-
shares are purchased.
Got it,
Whether you
got it,
purchase
got
it for $0 or you purchase it for $1 million, you have purchased those shares.
So the shares of a C Corp, if you hold them for 5 years without selling them, you pay 0 tax on them.
There's a lot of other rules. It's
But that's the
actually
basic.
very complicated because there's other rules. For example, you cannot repurchase shares within the 2-year period before or after you sell it. So yeah, I would tell you, it gets very complicated. I'm not going to get into it now because you're going to have 100 more questions, but that's the basics of it. The basics is that. There's other rules as well, but the hardest rules to follow is 5-year waiting period and it's a corporation. And that it's a small business which is defined as under 50 million in assets at the time of sale. And it's limited to certain industries. That's actually another big one.
What are those industries?
It's a list. So look it up, but it's technology companies. All technology companies are pretty much on that list.
Great.
So if you have a technology company, that's going to be covered. There's a whole bunch of other kind of companies on there, but I tell you, it is a complicated issue. If you want to really be sure that you're following QSBS, you'll have to get a CPA or tax attorney involved. But every shareholder looking to invest in a technology company, they all want QSBS status because it's a minimum of a 20% tax you're saving. So just imagine it's 20%, that it's huge. So that's why they're all going to look for QSBS. And that's why they're only going to invest in a corporation. If you're an LLC, you won't do it. And a little bit back with that British national. So if you're a British national, you're not a US person, which is defined as being citizen or permanent resident, then you can just do an LLC. You just won't do an S Corp, you do an LLC. That's the way you do it. So that's the reason why for the corporation, C Corp. That's why people go for C Corp. It's QSBS. Now, let's say you're in some industry that's not covered by QSBS, then pass-through status, then it doesn't make sense to be taxed twice. So if you want to save on taxes, you can be an LLC or an S Corp. Now, here's the other issue. Now, if, let's say you're an LLC, one of the issues, and you're like a single owner, you're doing your business, this would be like a consulting business. Consulting businesses, for example, would not get QSBS status. So you have a consulting business. You have to pay payroll tax on top of income tax. Now, payroll tax would be called self-employment tax. So you might have heard of self-employment tax. All that is a payroll tax. It's the same amount. It's the same thing, essentially. And that's about 16%. And you pay that on top of income tax. Now, one way that you can lower your payroll tax is you hire yourself as an employee, and then you pay payroll tax on your salary as an employee. And then the rest of the profit, since you're the owner of the company, the rest of the profit goes to you and you don't pay self-employment tax, that is payroll tax, on the profit, on the rest of the profit. You only pay it on your salary as an employee. Now here's the hitch. When you're an LLC, the IRS does not allow a member of an LLC to be an employee of the LLC. So you cannot be an employee if you're an LLC, unless you apply to be taxed as an S Corp. And here's the thing, an LLC can choose how it's taxed. So you can be an LLC and an S Corp, which is why I started off saying S Corp, C Corp, those are not legal. Those are tax classifications. Anybody can be C Corp, S Corp. LLC, corporation, those are your legal classifications. The IRS is looking at you differently through different eyes. So you could be an LLC and an S Corp. And you want to be that if you want to lower your payroll tax. Now, again, you do have to be careful. You can't just pay yourself $1 salary. You have to pay yourself what's considered a fair market value salary. Now, what that is, you have to be careful because you could be audited and you have to justify that, hey, what I'm paying myself is normal to be paid for. And as long as you can prove that's what it'll be, but the example, I'll give you an example with numbers. Let's say you have $100,000 in profit and you're not paying yourself. So then you have to pay self-employment tax of 16% on that. So that's $16,000. If instead, what you're doing as a consultant, it's normal to be paid as an employee $50,000 a year. So then you pay yourself, you make yourself an employee, pay yourself $50,000 a year, pay the payroll tax on the $50,000, which would be $8,000. And on the rest of the $50,000, the rest of the profit, you don't pay the payroll tax. So now you've saved $8,000. That's the effect of this whole process with the self-employment tax, LLC as an S Corp. Or you can form a corporation and file as an S Corp. Actually, it doesn't matter. Either way works. But with a corporate, but the reason maybe you would want to do an LLC is you don't have to do an annual meeting. LLC is just more flexible. LLC is easier just easier to deal with overall. So that's the reason why. But those are the tax things to consider. And that's why tax is really important to consider and which entity you're using. And so it depends what you're doing. If you're in a technology company looking for investors, you're going to want to be a corporation because of QSBS. If you're a consulting business or another industry that's not covered under QSBS, LLC, and then you want to be filed to become an S Corp. And it's easy filing. It's a form with the IRS. I want to say like 2259. I'm probably wrong, but it's something like that. It's one of those numbers. It's 22 something. But you find the form. It's like a 2-page form. You send it to the IRS, and then in the next fiscal year, you'll be taxed as S Corp.
Jose, a couple questions.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, can you convert an LLC to a C Corp?
Yes. Yes, you can do so. I think, again, I'll go back to my previous principle. In corporate law, everything is possible. It just costs money.
Okay. And then Margaret is asking if it's better that she obtain a C Corp and also maintain her nonprofit since she's seeking investors.
No, because a C Corp means that you're taxed. A nonprofit means, well, but generally speaking, if you're a nonprofit, you're trying to be not taxed. So those are different things. Yeah.
Okay.
So that question, because if you're a nonprofit, it means you're trying not to be taxed. So it doesn't make sense to be a C Corp.
All right. And then Leslie has raised her hand, but she also put into the chat, tech companies are better to have a C Corp.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, an S Corp. Investors will not invest in an S Corp.
So
Investors are looking for C Corps.
Yeah, an investor cannot invest in an S Corp because the other part of the S Corp, what I mentioned was that the shareholders have to be a natural person. In other words, shareholders have to be a human being. So an S Corp can't have shareholders that are an entity. And most investors, they do it through an entity. So if they're investing through an entity, they can't invest in an S Corp. So you have to be a C Corp to accept investors. And on top of that, you have to be a C Corp to do QSBS. And then to that first question about LLC to C Corp, you can convert, and you can convert to different states as well. But if you're looking for the QSBS, the 5-year period begins after conversion. It doesn't begin when the LLC began. It begins after you converted into the C Corp.
Okay. And somebody is asking if they can file a DBA for an LLC. They can do that for anything, can't they?
Yes, that's right. You can file a DBA as a sole proprietorship. So it doesn't matter.
Okay. Margaret wants to ask a question herself. So unmute. Go ahead, Margaret.
Thank you. So my business is education and entertainment. So in a sense, I'm like Sesame Street. There's aspects that are for nonprofit and then there's aspects that are for profit. So I would like investors. You're saying they're not going to invest in an LLC, but they would invest in a nonprofit, but they'd probably like it to be a profit C Corp?
So yeah, there's a lot of confusion in that statement. So just to put, what you need is, if you want to do something nonprofit, that has to be in a separate nonprofit entity. And that you can have a nonprofit LLC, you can have a nonprofit corporation, but it's a nonprofit, which means you're not doing it to make money. So by definition, it means you're not looking for investors. By definition, because you're saying, I don't want a profit. Investor means I'm looking to make a profit and someone's giving you money to get a piece of that profit. So you can form 2 separate businesses. Now you have to be careful because the way it works is the IRS says, you can do a nonprofit and we won't tax you, but you have to be doing it for the charitable purpose that you formed it for. You can't be using money given to you to the nonprofit and not to be taxed on it, and then using that to make a profit and make money to give to an investor or give to yourself. So that's why I'm saying there's some confusion here, because those are 2 different objectives, 2 different aims, and you can't have ownership in a nonprofit because no one owns a nonprofit, because the whole point of it is that you're doing this for charity. So there is no ownership in a nonprofit. There's people that can run, and they run the nonprofit. They're in charge of the nonprofit. They're responsible for the nonprofit, but there's no one that's getting money from it. Let's put it this way. If you are getting money from a nonprofit, you may be facing jail. So because you can't, that's the whole point of the nonprofit. the whole point of it. Now, there are organizations that, hey, you know what? I have a nonprofit and I have an idea and the nonprofit has something coming out of it that is actually can make money, can make profit. So there are for-profit businesses that are spun out of nonprofits all the time. You just have to be very careful in informing that. So, but you have to make sure that these are separate organizations.
Yeah, I get that. Nonprofits, some of them do make money regardless. And even if it's a school, say UNLV, they're going to have percentages of royalties of products that they contributed their research to build. So there's still a profit from a product that was based and founded in research and education quite often. There's a
But those are
need to
not
have.
considered profits. Those then need to be spent on the charitable purpose. A profit is something that is given to the owners.
Got it. So seeking investors, I want to make sure that I have them lined up with the profit aspects and not the nonprofit.
Correct.
Okay.
And you will need to be careful because if you're running the nonprofit and you're running a for-profit company and there's some relations between them, you have to be very careful because the nonprofit cannot have conflicts of interest. In other words, if I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit and I'm saying, hey, donate some money and then I'm going to use that money on this for-profit company that I'm also the owner of, that's a conflict of interest and you run into dangers where you're going to lose your taxable status and potentially face jail time.
That is one of these questions that I've been asking. Like I asked a bazillion people, including lawyers who wouldn't tell me for free because they had to research. But I'm like, what are the conflicts of interest here? Because how much royalties can I give those who work for the nonprofit? And it was a big thing for quite a while. So I guess what you're saying is largely as long as whatever is allocated to the nonprofit is spent for nonprofit results, then that's fine. Just don't.
What I would say is that you do need to get a lawyer involved because you're entering a very dangerous territory if you're wanting to do those two things, and you have to be very careful, and it's all about the details and how you're doing it exactly. So for me to tell you off the spot, like this is the way to do it, it's very complicated. Now, there are ways to do what you want to do. You just have to be very careful. But the overarching principle is this. You cannot run a nonprofit in order to make yourself money. That's the principle.
Got it.
That's the principle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So I have a question. Can you run different type of businesses under one legal name? For example, couple startups and regular business.
Yes, you can. The reason you would not is that if one business does something that causes someone to sue you, the person that is suing you has access to the profits of all your businesses because it's all one entity. So you want to separate. The reason you would separate in different entities is so that if one business gets sued, then they only have access to what is owned by that one business.
So you say, for example, if I start startup based on my company, so if somebody invests in my company, they will have shares from my regular business.
Yeah, because so if you have one, let's say LLC, and all the one C corp, and all these businesses are run under the same C corp, and you have somebody invest in that C corp, then they have a percent of all your business, of everything that C corp owns.
Got it. Thank you.
Now, one thing is what you can do is, and this is common, is you start off a business, see if it's profitable, and if it is, you spin it out. That's when you have a spin off. Because then you spin it out into its own C Corp or LLC, whatever it is, and you can move the assets into that once you've proven that it's profitable. So I don't know if you have more questions, but I'll get to the next slide, which is like choosing an entity. Like, what are the things to consider? The first thing is the strategy of, like, for example, if it's a consulting business, like I said, you're not going to be having investors, then it may make sense to do an LLC. If you're looking for investors, well, then it depends on what kind of investors. If it's going to be venture capital, they only look for things to be done one way. Delaware corporation. Taxes a C Corp. That's it. Nothing else. Nothing else considered. Sometimes, now, that's professional venture fund. That's it. Now, there's other investors, like there's family offices, angel investors, some corporate investors who are less rigid. And they'll be open to other they could be open to a Nevada corporation. They could be open to LLCs. It just depends on the investor. But if you want to have less, and you can still be a Nevada corporation or California corporation and look for venture capital too. It's just it's just less. It's almost like dating. Like you just lower your dating pool because there are some VC investors who in their investment documents, they say we will only invest in Delaware corporations. So they just won't be able to look at you. Or they'll force you to convert. And the thing is, converting costs money. And the more activity you have in your LLC, or the more activity you have in any entity, the conversion becomes more and more expensive. So that's why if you start off right, you just have less expenses over the long term. So that's really the thing to consider. What's your strategy? What are you using it? What's the business? That's one thing. And then there's the home state versus Delaware, like Nevada. Because here's the thing. If you do a Delaware, you have to, the way it works in the US is that every state considers the entities of a different state the same as it would an entity from a different country. And if you look on the Silver Flume, which is Nevada's site, it's going to say, is this a Nevada entity or is it a foreign entity? Because the Delaware corporation is a foreign corporation under Nevada law. It's the same as coming from a different country in a way. And so you have to register it to do business in Nevada. So even if you live here, you're doing a Delaware corporation, you have to register it to do business. And that's an extra cost. So if you're not looking for a venture capital investor, then you don't have to go through this extra cost because you should be Nevada corporation or Nevada LLC, because otherwise you have to pay that extra money to register it. And so that's the thing to consider, the home state versus Delaware. And the reason why, by the way, people always ask a lot, why do venture capitalists always look for a Delaware corporation? It's corporation because QSBS. Why Delaware? Well, the whole venture capital industry, and many lawyers don't want to admit this, and people don't talk about it, the whole industry is designed to pay lawyers less money. So if I am investing in 50 different companies, and some are Delaware, some are Nevada, some are California, and I have a problem with one of my founders, and I want to sue them, I need to hire, let's say I have a problem with founders from a Delaware corporation. I then hire a lawyer to give me a legal opinion of how do I sue the founders based on Delaware law. And then 6 months later, I have the same problem with another company, and they're out of Nebraska. They're a Nebraska corporation. Now I got to hire a Nebraska lawyer and ask the same question and get another legal opinion and pay another lawyer more money for the same answer. But if they're all Delaware, I get that legal opinion once, it applies to everybody. I have now lowered my legal costs. That's why they all chose Delaware, because Delaware traditionally has had the laws in favor of the business owners. And as an investor, you're one of the owners. So that's why Delaware was chosen traditionally. And so that's the kind of thing to note. But with that said, outside of that world of venture capital, it's less rigid. It's less rigid. Then it's more about corporation, less about state. And that's because of the QSBS. But if you're not subject to QSBS, don't worry about that at all. LLC is really flexible, really good. And if you're based here in Nevada, stay in Nevada. You can lower your costs right there. Nevada LLC all day long. And then that PLLC question, by the way, the professional, it applies more than lawyers. Basically, it's any profession, any licensed profession. You basically, so if you're trying to do a business in some licensed profession, like could be nursing, doctor, lawyer, no, they can be, because they're not really, I don't think so. But basically for the other licensed professions, the point of a PLLC is, for example, I'm a PLLC. So what does that mean? What that means is I don't have limited liability if I screw up with my legal advice. So you can sue me for bad legal advice, and you can sue and get my house, my car, my personal bank accounts. You can get everything. Or a doctor as well. You can go after him personally. I can't hide behind limited liability protection. And I can't have an LLC for my legal practice. My legal practice has to be a PLLC. Same thing with a doctor or a nurse or other kind of licensed professions. So when you see that, so if anyone out there is doing something that's a licensed profession, or you're trying to do a business into like let's say you're not a doctor, but you're trying to do a medical business that's going to have doctors involved, just know you can't be an owner of anything that's giving medical advice. Only a doctor can, for example, and only a lawyer can for a PLLC that's doing law. So that's one thing to note. So in operational flexibility, that's another thing. So again, that goes to my point of LLC. You want to have more flexibility, be an LLC. If you care less about flexibility and the other things way more, it depends on what's more important to you. Because with an LLC, you can be really, just to tell you how flexible it is. With a corporation, it has to have shareholders. It has to have board of directors, has to have these things. With an LLC, I said that the owners are called members. If you want, you can call them whatever you want. You can say that all the owners are called unicorns. And as long as your company agreement says the owners are all called unicorns, and I'm going to have 10 unicorns, and it's going to be a board of whatever, a board of dragons, you can do that. You can. It'll be a mess. You'll confuse everybody, but legally, you can. And that's how flexible LLCs are. LLCs are supremely flexible. Whatever you put in your operating agreement, that's what it is. That's the law. So that's why LLCs are often used. No question.
What is the level of protection on the LLC? What if my product is, someone could get injured. Imagine you've gone whitewater rafting before and you sign a waiver. You might get injured, but have you ever? Who dies whitewater rafting? Not many people. But I don't want somebody to say they broke their arm and sue me. That kind of thing.
Well, the limited liability protection for an LLC is the same as corporation. The difference being that with a corporation, there are some more rigid requirements. For example, the annual meeting.
Gotcha.
With an LLC, it's not as rigid. Now, it doesn't mean that you can run wild and put all the money of your business into your personal bank account. No, you still need to treat the LLC as a separate person with a separate account, and you have to treat it with respect. So even if you want to call whatever you want it, call your owners unicorns, but if you decide to do that, you have to treat it seriously. And that's what you're calling things. And that's what you're doing. So as long as you treat it seriously and treat it as a separate person, then you have the same limit,
Same liability protection.
Both have the same protections. Good question here.
Thank you. What if you want to go from an S corp or corporation, sorry, a corporation to an LLC? How complicated is that? And I'll add in one more nuance to it. What if the corporation already has contracts and deals out, and so it receives income to that corporation, specifically to that corporation, and you wanted to turn it into an LLC? I know the answer is anything can be done.
Yeah,
but
so
I want to understand what that process even looks like.
for any conversion, LLC to corporate to LLC, from a legal standpoint, it keeps the same personhood. So any contracts you have as a corporation, and when it converts to an LLC, any contracts you have stay there. No change. That's the reason why you might want to do a conversion, because there's other ways to accomplish the same thing. You can also create a separate entity and then merge them. So there's different ways to do it. But when you do a conversion, the contracts stay the same. Now, when you do LLC to corporation, you're going from at least the default, LLC not paying taxes separately to corporation that is double taxed. The IRS is like slobbering. They're like, yes, please do it. They make it super easy. You just file that one form. You want to do a corporation where you're paying double taxes to now an LLC where you're paying less taxes. You can do it, but the IRS makes it much more difficult.
What if it's going from an S corp?
And to be honest, I've barely done those. It's very rare. And so if I remember correctly, I think they require you to make some prepayment of taxes. There's a whole thing. You have to determine how much taxes you would have paid, and then you pay that in advance. And it's a whole process, the more complicated to do from corporation to LLC.
The reason why I'm asking, just to put into context, is that I have an S corp that is a California S corp. And if you know anything about California corporations, they're a little bit more complicated.
Yes.
And I'm based in Las Vegas, and it's not making a whole lot of sense for me to continue to have an S corp. And I've thought about converting it into an S corp, a Nevada S corp, which involves some sort of process.
So put that in context is, like I said, there's two different processes here. There's a legal one and there's IRS.
Yeah.
So I was assuming the default But if it's an S corp, you're basically saying you want to go from a California
S-
corporation
S
that's
corp,
taxed
yeah.
as an S corp. So let's say a Nevada corporation taxes an S corp.
Or an
That would be-
LLC.
That'll be simpler to do because as far as from the IRS's perspective, you're not changing. You're not changing anything. From the legal perspective, yes, it's called redomiciling.
Yeah,
You're
that's-
changing
yeah.
your domicile from California to Nevada. So, and that process is not, well, so here's the other thing. And here's another principle in corporate law. If it involves California, it's more expensive and more difficult.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's part of my thought process.
Like, I'll
here.
give
But
you an
then-
example. Delaware, to file a corporation, it costs like $110 right now, and they just increased it. It was like $90 for many years. In California, I think it's $800.
800, yeah. But also you're talking a lot about just the flexibility of the LLC, and I feel like, is there an advantage just from that standpoint? I know it's easier just go S corp to S corp, but like just in reducing the amount of complexity that comes with an S corp, it is a loan out company, so it is really like a part of me and my business.
There is some additional, but to be honest, like, is it a whole lot different? Because a lot of people get scared with corporations, but if you've been dealing with a corporation already for years, the LLC will make things a little bit easier. But if you're the sole owner and you're going to continue to be the sole owner, I think the advantage you get from the LLC, well, it just depends. If you're not concerned about the cost, yeah, I mean, it'll be more expensive to convert it to the LLC, incorporation LLC. But if you keep from corporation to corporation, that'll be simpler and easier and less expensive.
Cool. Thanks so much.
So anyways, I think we've covered all this, the double taxation versus QSBS.
Can you do one more question?
Yeah.
Is it better to open an LLC in Wyoming, or would it be better to do it here? Because I keep hearing always to open one in Wyoming.
So, yeah, the question is, why Wyoming LLC? There's two main reasons why you would want to do Wyoming. One is if you have a crypto-related company. Wyoming is, to date, unless it's changed in the past couple months, but as far as I know, they have the only legislation that's defining a lot of different things in crypto. For example, they define what a DAO is. And so if you're in crypto, Wyoming is very friendly towards the blockchain technology and being able to form LLCs that are used with blockchain technology, which is the technology with cryptocurrencies. And what's also, if you heard Web3, crypto, blockchain, Wyoming is at the forefront of that with their laws. So a lot of people that'll be a reason to do Wyoming LLC. The second reason is to form, if you have an attorney or a third party form your Wyoming LLC, you can do the formation and without giving your personal information to the state. And so it is a way, if you want to keep anonymity, there's ultimately, if someone sues the state, they can get the information. But just on the first level, when people go onto the state website and looks things up, they won't have your information with a corporation or LLC. So that's a reason why people who are really concerned about some initial anonymity, you might want to form a Wyoming LLC for that reason. But otherwise, again, you will increase your cost because you'll have to register that in whatever state that you're doing business in. Yes, you would have to register in Nevada.
I'm trying to do that undercover.
And Jose, if it's a Nevada-based company that's selling an app online to customers in other states, do they have to register in each of those other states? How are they supposed to keep track of which states they're selling in?
So the definition of doing business in a state, it varies by states, but the basic principles are this. If you have any real estate in that state, you have any employees in that state, if you have any offices, you're leasing space in that state, you need to be registered in that state. And then as far as selling things in those state, the general term you use, the legal term is you have a nexus. And the definition of nexus will vary by state, but generally speaking, it's if you have sales. I think the lowest number I forgot which state it is, but I think it's $100,000. In some states, it's 200, 250. I believe in Nevada, well, so if you're outside of Nevada, in Nevada, you'd have to be doing, I think it's 200,000 in Nevada. So if you're doing sales in every state, but in most of your states, you're not selling more than like $10,000, you don't have to worry about it. And if that's all you're doing and you don't have anything else from that state, but once you start selling in the over 100,000, you're going to need to start looking at that, at registering in that state. And you also have to look at sales taxes And that number is a different number than the registration number. And I don't know what that is. I think in some states it's as low as like 25,000 or 50,000 when you start having to worry about paying sales tax in that state.
Thanks, Jose.
So let me see, try to get through these next slides. Steps to form an entity. So just saying you choose your business name. You can check for availability, and the state websites will have where you can check the availability. You can also go to the uspto.gov to look for trademark registrations and see if that name's available. The one thing to remember is that your legal name doesn't have to have anything to do with the name of what you're selling. So for example, Google's legal name is Alphabet Inc. So Alphabet Inc. has nothing to do with Google, but so they just do a DBA. What you do is you do a DBA for the name you want to use. So your legal name can be anything you want. Just know that it doesn't have to. So it's already taken. Don't worry, just choose something else. And then you file a DBA for the name of whatever you're selling. So
That's doing business as.
yes, doing it. So it's also called in many states. So again, like I think the principal said earlier on, we have so many different names for everything. So it's DBA. It's also called an assumed name. So in some states, you won't see the word DBA anywhere. They just call it assumed name. And you get an assumed name certificate. Well, that's a DBA. That's all it is. DBA is short for, as she said, doing business as. And if you ever see FKA, that's formerly known as. That's when you've changed your name. And you kind of put that on. So you register with the state. So once you know that okay, name's available, you register with the state. Again, you don't have to have an attorney to do all these things. You just go in the state. A lot of them will provide you with form documents to file in that state. But Silver Flume, their portal is actually pretty good, by the way. I think Nevada is one of the better states. Like, for example, Texas's website is still from like, it looks like it's still from 1990s. It's really old and clunky. And then you file that with the state. Once you get this filed copy, it's like a stamped copy that has a stamp showing that it's been filed with the state, then you obtain your EIN. Technically, you could do it beforehand, but the problem is when you obtain your EIN, which you go onto the IRS, it's irs.gov/EIN. It takes all of like 5 minutes. Again, you don't have to have a lawyer involved. You can do it yourself. It takes 5 minutes, but you have to have a social security number. So if you don't have a social security number, then you have to have someone involved in your company, a responsible person who has one, who then can help you file this for you. Or you have to get an international tax ID number, ITIN, which takes, you have to do it through mail, and it can take a while. But for those of you who are US persons and you have a social security number, super fast and easy to get EIN. I would say, because there's a lot of services that charge you for it, I wouldn't pay $100 for it. It literally takes like minutes to do, minutes. Yeah, well, so it's a separate process. So technically you could do it immediately. You could do it now, but here's the problem. If you do it now and you choose a name and then you file with the state and for some reason they say your name isn't right, you have to change your name. Now you have an EIN with the wrong name. You have to redo it now. Now you have to redo your EIN because it's under the wrong name. Yeah, yeah. And then one of the things the EIN when you file for it, they'll ask if you want it by mail or right now by PDF. Always do by PDF. Then you just get it now and save it. If you do it by mail, you have to wait 2 weeks. So that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They're like, oh, I'll just do by mail. And it's like, okay, now you're waiting to get it because it's not that you say by mail and then you'll get it. Then you'll see your EIN and then you'll wait for the mail. No, you won't see your EIN number until you get it in the mail. And then you're like, oh man. Well, if you push like PDF now, you get it, you just save it. You get your number immediately. And then you can open your bank account because that's the next step. With you need for your bank account, you have to have the filed copy and an EIN and ID. The hardest part of forming a business is the bank account. I'm just telling you, that's the hardest part. Because I've had it where I've had to form like my PLLC and then I get a bank account and they're like, and then I changed the name of my business. And then they're like, well, the original filing was a different name and I wanted the business account in this name and it was a mess. It took forever. So that's the harder part. So, well, you don't have to, just saying that it's just more paperwork and yeah. Make your life easier, keep everything the same. And then you make sure that you have your operating agreement, if it's an LLC or bylaws, and make sure you have all those things created and signed. Because a lot of times people maybe create them and never sign them. Get everything signed because people will look at, you'll always need it later. Now, again, if you don't sign it now, you can sign it later, but you just make your life easier if you sign it, all do it at the same time. Other legal considerations, annual filings, just know there's annual reports. I get that all the time where people are like, whether like Delaware, for example, you have to pay the annual franchise tax before March 1st. With all corporations, you have to file, like everyone knows, like April 15th for your tax filings. Not with corporations. It's March 15th with the IRS. So you have to make sure that you have to make all those filings ahead of time for the business filings. In every state, you'll have to do annual reports. I forgot off the top of my head when's the deadline for Nevada, but just know. Is it better this month? Okay. So every state kind of has it differently. So if you have entities in different states, just know you have to do an annual filing. And sometimes it comes, well, and it always comes with, usually it comes with some cost. It depends. Texas, for example, there is no cost for annual filing unless you have revenues of over $2.1 million. Licensing and permits depends on what you're doing. Like Clark County has a business license. They have to do it. And that's really just, it's just whatever, $25, $50, I think. You just give your name and address. Different. So depending what state or whatever you're doing, there's what you're doing, depending, there might be some license. You're doing something medical, there's a lot of licenses you have to get for that. For example, a medical lab has to have certain lab licenses. So that'll depend. Intellectual property, well, most people are worried about trademarks, patents. Those are two most areas. Patents, everyone kind of understands. Those are, it's expensive to hire lawyers for that, but that's if you have a process that basically is easy to see and you want to protect it and have a monopoly on it. Now, if it's something that's hard to see, like no one knows how you created it, like it's, for example, like it's a food mixture, and you know, like Coca-Cola formula is the real example. Well, then you don't need to make it as a patent. You keep it as a trade secret. And the difference in a trade secret, the way you keep that protected is you don't have to file with anybody. You just keep it a secret. And that's it. And that's as long as you keep it a secret. And if somebody else steals it, then you can sue them and they can't use it because they stole it. But if you're not keeping it a secret, you have this formula and you're showing it to your friends, then if somebody steals it, they can say, well, hold on a second. They were showing it to their friends. So it's not a secret. And then you lost the secret. So even if someone steals it from you, but you were showing it to other people, you will lose your trade secret. So you just have to keep it a secret. Now you can show it to people, but they have to sign NDAs. And that's how you protect a trade secret. But if it's something that it's easy to figure out, just by looking at it, the way you protect it is through a patent. And then you show that you're the first one to do it. And then trademark is as people know, it's a mark showing what you're doing. And yeah. Yeah, so you're asking really, yeah. So I'm not a patent lawyer. So you want to get into that area, yeah, I'm not a patent lawyer. I know the basics. I know enough to tell you when to go to a patent lawyer. If you want to know the difference between a utility patent and a design patent, it's a.
So if you have a trademark and your trademark is for Nevada, is it active for all 50 states?
So it's a good question. So I was going to get into that. So trademarks, you own trademarks under the US, which is different than in most countries. Ownership of a trademark comes through usage. Registering it does not give you ownership. Registering a trademark just makes it easier for you to sue somebody. Otherwise, and it has another side benefit is if someone else gets a web domain with the name that you have the trademark, you can kick them off and get it. But that's like a side benefit. But in reality, ownership comes from using it. It doesn't come from registering it. So you could have a registered trademark, but if you show that I've been using this like for a long time before you registered it, then you can kick them off the registration and you now own it. And then to your question about geographical, well, it depends. Have you used it in the 50 states? If you've only been using it in Nevada, you only have rights to it in Nevada. And if you want rights to it throughout the US, you need to use it throughout the US.
Like trademark.
And then there is a state trademark you can get.
Okay.
And the reason, and again, it has the same kind of effect as the federal one, where it gives you better rights. And one other point, I would give you an example. Amazon formed, they registered their trademark, then it came out. This was early days of Amazon, because they started in the late 90s. Around 2001, 2002, there was an Amazon bookstore in Topeka, Kansas, who'd been around since 1950s. And in the beginning, Amazon was selling books mostly. An Amazon bookstore out of Topeka, Kansas says, oh, hold on a second. We have all this proof. We've been around since the 1950s. This is our trademark. This is our name. But they were only in Kansas. So what happened was they couldn't advertise. Amazon.com couldn't not advertise in Kansas until they made a deal where they paid money to the bookstore in order to get rights to use the name. So.
Yeah, you could say somebody who's starting a business and has a brand that they potentially think could be valuable, a trademark brand that could potentially be valuable, but they're not totally sure. Rather than spending a lot of money and time and energy registering it, just prove it by using it and using it in meaningful ways that would offer a degree of protection early on as you decide whether or
Right.
not this is something that you actually want to invest time
Use
to
it
really
in
truly
ways
protect.
that you can have a date stamp.
Right.
That's what I would advise. Use it in ways for that if you don't want to do the initial expenditure of a trademark registration. The reason a trademark registration is helpful, though, is that anyone can look it up and they can see, oh, that's already been registered, so I'm not going to even bother with that. So it wards off people too, instead of you having to search and see if someone else is using yours. Because if it's not registered, someone just doesn't know, they might not know you exist. If there's someone that's in Maine and they may be doing something similar, especially if it's a software product that's on the web, it's not just in Nevada, it's really available all over the world. So the federal trademark can do that. But if you're price sensitive, because I'll tell you, like, for example, I charge $1,200 flat fee to do a trademark. And so that's $1,200. You want to wait to use that, but you still want to have rights to it, then start doing that. And you have to use it, the legal term is you have to use it in commerce.
Yeah.
So you have to be, for example, business cards can work, or you have a website. The problem with a website is hard to have that tight time date stamped. There are ways you can put a date on there, but sending an email to somebody with your logo or something. So if you can find different ways, sending something in the mail and have it certified. That's different ways you can create things that shows, hey, I've been using this since this date. Or like when you get a business cards, for example, and you keep the receipt for getting those business cards under those names. That helps show and prove I've been using this logo or this trademark word, this mark for this amount of time. And then when you have enough money, then you can get it registered with the USPTO or with the state as well. Like if you only want to be using it in the state, you don't plan on expanding, getting with the state, that'll be less expensive. And it's much easier to do with the state than it is federally. And because it takes time, by the way. USPTO right now, they're having problems, and it used to take like 6 months, and it's taking now sometimes a year to a year and a half. So yeah. But again, your rights don't change because your rights come from using it. So is that employment laws? One thing to remember, employment laws depends on the state where the employee resides. So you can say that you can have a contract that says this is going to be under Nevada law, but doesn't matter if they're based in California, California laws protect them, no matter what your contract says. So, or if you have someone based in another country, it's those countries' laws that matter, not the state where you're at. And then contractual agreements. So just make sure, yeah, the point here is, especially with small businesses, you get used to sometimes just doing business with people and not having anything written down. And you should have things written down. Helps you, especially if you ever want to sell the company. If a buyer comes in, they're going to want to see contracts. They're going to want to see that, because if everything is based on a personal relationship and then you disappear, then that personal relationship's gone, then you might not have those same deals for the company, so the company becomes worth less. So that's the point, especially if those of us are starting a business in order to build wealth. Because eventually what you want to do eventually is sell the company. And that's why you set all these things up well in the beginning so that you have less to worry about later on. And that's kind of the point of setting everything up legally correctly to start with. Again, everything can be solved with money, but when the whole point is making a profit, which means spending less money, it's better to do these things correctly from the beginning. So, and then one thing I want to leave is, like, the reason I love what I do is that I feel it's a blessing to work with people who are starting businesses, because everyone is trying to make the world a little bit better through what you're doing. So I'm happy to support and help you to do that, and always cognizant of how much things cost and what it is, because like Maggie said when we started, was I am a startup founder myself. I am a business owner, so I know what it's like. So thank you, everybody.
Can I ask you the last question? The last question. Can I ask you the last
Yeah,
question?
you have another question.
So when do you think is the greatest point to start a registering company for your startup?
Okay. So the question was, when should you incorporate or form the entity? The answer is whenever you're going to do something that's going to cause you liability. So that would be making a loan, getting a loan, for example, that's liability. You want to owe this money. Or you have a product where someone's going to start using something that you've built, then they could sue you if something goes wrong. You hire an employee, or you want to hire an employee or a contractor, you want to hire somebody, and they could sue you if something goes wrong. Leasing something, like anything you're doing that could cause someone to sue you or to say that you owe them money, then you should have your business in place before that.
Thank you very much.
Jose,
Yeah,
thank you
yeah.
so much. You have a lot of people asking questions and they're wondering did you put up contact information? Can they follow up with some questions?
Yes. I think I have it here, but I have it here. Yeah. It's Jose@Padilla.law. And my website is Padilla.law.
Wonderful. Thanks so
And
much.
I put in a plug also for my startup, by the way, is AI paralegal to help small businesses and startups spend less on lawyers like me. So, and I neglect to have this, but it's LegalMented.ai. So legal, MENTE.ai. And it is AI paralegal, $9 a month. And it's designed to answer like all these questions you guys asked. You can ask it of the AI. It can also help you form LLCs and corporations. And during the formation process, ask all these questions. And it's been all optimized. We have a patent for what we're doing. We don't hallucinate. We've gone through benchmarks to show that we're actually more accurate for legal questions than all the big guys out there. So you might be using ChatGPT, but I'll tell you, because my paralegals use ChatGPT. They used to use ChatGPT. Now we all use my product because ChatGPT will lie to you sometimes. Or I'll get this. I'll have clients where I'll send them an agreement and I'll tell them, can you approve this? And they'll just put it, and they don't want to read it. Because, by the way, that's like 90% of my job, reading something no one else wants to read. So they even don't want to read something that I need their approval for. And they put it through ChatGPT and they come back to me and they tell me like, hey, ChatGPT told me that you're missing these 3 clauses. And I have to tell them, you're right, it's missing those 3 clauses because those 3 clauses are better for the other side. So I purposely eliminated those. And ChatGPT is not designed to help small business. It's to help like the common and the most common contracts you're going to see are with the big businesses. So that's why we designed our product to be more to help the small businesses and the startups. So that's what it is. And it's unfortunately, I don't have it up here. I should have thought of that before, but it's LegalMented.ai. Or you just email me at Jose@Padilla.law. Happy to share information. Legal mind, because I put my legal mind into an AI model. It is multilingual though too. So.
Spanish.
Well, it is multilingual because it is global. It'll actually help you with other countries' laws too.
With a specialized.
Yes.
So Jose,
We'll do basic contracts. Yeah. Yes. It basically does what a paralegal could do. So it will not give you legal advice, but it'll give you legal information. And just like templates, like a paralegal will give you templates, it'll give you like an NDA and you can tell it how to change it and we'll do all of that. And you can upload contracts and ask questions of the contract. So.
Jose,
Anything else?
Nevada in this session passed AJR 8, and it is to set up chancery courts in Nevada so Nevada can compete with Delaware.
Yes.
Oh, it has to pass again, and then the public has to vote on it, but at least we're moving in that direction.
I heard about that. And I'll tell you, like, okay, back in the day, when I first started, because I'm old enough, when I started being a lawyer, we didn't have internet. We had to go to law libraries and look things up manually. And back then, actually, Nevada was the second state to be, it was Delaware and Nevada were the 2 states. But in the 2000s, Delaware took over, but Nevada is still, like I've talked about in Wyoming, if you're doing asset protection, Nevada is still #1 for asset protection. So no matter where you are in the US, if you want to protect your assets, you're going to want to use a Nevada entity because the laws are stronger when it comes to protecting assets. So the big ones are that. It's Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada. Texas is trying to get into the game because what Nevada is trying to propose is building a business court. Texas just did that last year because previously, here's the thing with Delaware has had their business court for a long time because in many states, what would happen is you have a business case and you have a lawsuit and that judge might have done a divorce case right before yours or child custody, and then now they're doing your complex business case. While in Delaware, they had a separate court for business cases, so all their judges, that's all they did day in, day out. And so it's more trustworthy, and then plus you have a bunch of case law because you had a lot of experience. So if you have a question as to how would the court rule on this, you had a lot of examples, while in other states you didn't. And that's why Nevada, hopefully soon, will have a business court. So then we'll be able to compete with Delaware on that as well. And yeah.
Agreed. Jose, thank you so much for being here. I know people's heads are spinning because you covered so much ground and so much information. So we really appreciate your coming here in person to do this. Love it.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. Thank you, everybody online.
Just one more question. I'm going to speak to the EINs. Is there a maximum of EINs that you can have? Like if I-
No, but this question was if maximum number of EINs. So you can only form EINs during business hours. So even though it's online, it can only be done during business hours. And you only can do one per day per social security number. So in other words, I can't go on there and form with my social security number like 5 different EINs, or it's only going to allow me to do like one. And then I have to wait till the next day to do the next one. But personally, I can, if I want to, I can do 100 of them. You'll get onto the IRS's radar and they will start auditing you, but you can do as many as you want.
Corporations do that.
No, you can be a sole proprietorship and get an EIN. But there'll be a question though. The question when you're doing an EIN is what kind of entity are you, or do you not have an entity? So, but every business should have a separate EIN.
The $49 is the $9 unlimited promotion, or are people grandfathered into it, or does the 49 come back?
Yeah, so we have for LegalMented, we have the different scales. So eventually, so we have different products. We have a specialized contract module. That one is limited under the $9 versus the 49. And then as far as the AI paralegal, that one is currently unlimited, but it will in the future, will be start limiting.
/0 that says $9.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Just wondering if that's grand.
For like in the future will be, yeah, for now, that's what it is for now. Okay.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Jose.
thank you.
And
everybody.
we will see you guys all in person on Thursday for mentor sessions.
Yes.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, no
So long.
problem.
By the way, um,